Thanks for getting here on time. We're going to start on time because we've got 60 minutes in which to try and put to you through a hypothetical scenario. What if there is a succession crisis in North Korea? We can dispute the word crisis, but we want to examine what succession will mean. Maybe we could just shut one of the doors at least for the moment. Thank you. It is a what if, as we call it. It's about scenarios, but it's a way to hear from three sides, from South Korea, from China, and also from Japan, their view or the current thinking that there is about what is happening in North Korea at the moment. Remember that things have been going into reverse since April of last year, when the North Korean government talked about the six-party talks being dead and gone forever. The issue at this very moment, unless something happens while we're sitting in here, is succession. What is going to happen? We assume that the Workers' Party Congress is about to convene at some point. As far as we know, it hasn't yet convened. And hour by hour, we're waiting to find out what happens and what might happen. And as many of you know, Kim Jong-il was in China up until the 31st of August. And the official news agencies of both sides confirmed that he was here and he met the president as well. But how smooth will the succession be? What kind of succession will there be? Is there going to be a succession? Certainly in the foreseeable future. What we know is that the unexpected happens all too frequently. For example, in 1979, when President Park was killed by his head of intelligence over dinner. So much is unexpected in this scenario. Now, we want you to think about what will happen, and we want our guests to think about what will happen when something happens on Monday of next week. But before we get to the first headline, I'd like our five guests to introduce themselves. Professor Moon first.
Chung-In Moon, I'm professor.
Wait a minute, let's check that your microphone is working. Otherwise, we'll be. That's better. Yeah.
Working. I'm a professor of political science at Yonsei University, and I attended the first Korean summit and second Korean summit as a special delegate, and I had a lunch with Chairman Kim Jong-il twice. Therefore, I think I know something about North Korea.
When was the last time you had lunch with him?
2007, October 2007.
Are you sure it was him?
Yes, quite sure.
There's a reason for me asking that. Professor Nam.
My name is Nam from Korea. My job is the director of the National Institute of Securities. My institute is sponsored by the government. Therefore, I have to comment very carefully. Please understand my situation. Thank you.
Professor Yan.
Okay, I'm Xuetong from the Tsinghua University. My major is international security. So the nuclear issues in North Korea and bring me to study a little bit about this region.
Mr. Yang.
My name is Xiyu from China Institute for International Studies. I major in studying Korean Peninsula issues as well as Northeast Asian affairs.
And Mr. Shigemura, Professor.
Yeah, I'm Shigemura, professor of Waseda University.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Oh, I'm Toshimitsu. I am the professor of Waseda University in Tokyo. I used to be a journalist for 30 years. I was correspondent to Seoul and Washington, D.C. for毎日 newspapers. I was the first Japanese correspondent who can speak Korean.
Thank you very much indeed. And the reason I just raised the question of whether Professor Moon knew that he was talking to Kim Jong-il, because you have questioned whether there are in fact doubles at work, and you believe that's the case, correct?
Yes. I wrote a book. The possibility is very high. We checked the Kim Jong-il's voice, the voice print. The first voice is 1984, 1985. The other was the 2004, is the Koizumi's visiting.
But Professor Moon, you reject what Tosh says.
Because the same Kim Jong-il whom I met in 2000 and same Kim Jong-il whom I met in 2007. Even voice was the same. The way he makes his gesture was the same. Therefore, I think that the Kim Jong-il is the same Kim Jong-il, and he's still well and alive.
But
I've asked them to share. We're not going to dispute this now. I've asked them to share that with you because it's important background to making the judgment about a succession. A succession to who? Let's move ahead, and I've asked each of them to give 3 minutes of their view of whether a crisis is brewing. Imagine next Monday, September the 20th, 2010. This is the headline. Kim Jong-un becomes a member of the Supreme People's Assembly and is considered the future leader of North Korea, the third son of Kim Jong-il. Professor Moon, your 3 minutes, please, on what this means, whether this means a crisis.
It is very likely he could be a member of the Supreme People's Assembly, but I wouldn't say that there would be official designation of Kim Jong-un as a de facto successor or de jure successor of Kim Jong-il. Reason is very simple. North Korea is more Confucian than the Confucius himself. Unless Kim Jong-un shows his devotion to the people and service to the people, he cannot get legitimacy. Without having gained legitimacy, he cannot be the leader of North Korea. Therefore, I would say that succession of Kim Jong-un as a real successor to Kim Jong-il will take some time. Meanwhile, I really don't think there will be any crisis, a succession crisis. Reason is very simple. National Defense Commission of North Korea is very well established, and it is in fact the day-to-day, in charge of day-to-day operation of North Korea. Therefore, I think under the collective leadership of National Defense Commission, Kim Jong-un, if he is designated as a successor, North Korea will be able to steer its system and national governance. Therefore, I don't see any upcoming succession crisis.
Do you believe this headline is likely at some time in the near future?
I don't think this coming so-called, there will be a meeting of representatives or delegates of the North Korean Workers' Party this coming week or within 2 weeks period. But I really don't think there will be any official designation of Kim Jong-un as some kind of success to Kim Jong-il. No, I don't think so.
Dr. Yang, your view from Beijing with your 10 years of experience analyzing every single development on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, firstly, I think the hypothetical question, the possibility of the hypothetical question is pretty low, simply because of the domestic situation in North Korea. Many people remember that more than 10 years ago, there were a lot of speculations about the crisis in North Korea. And the situation then is much worse than the situation now. So I cannot understand why we have a high expectation that the crisis, a succession crisis is coming, is approaching. And also, I would argue, in my observation, their policy focus in recently began to shift from military first to economic first. That kind of shift reflects their confidence, political confidence, and stability confidence in stability. So given the background, I cannot see any possibility of the crisis in North Korea.
Can I just ask, as you represent the ministry, can I ask, is it clear after the 5-day visit of Kim Jong-il to Beijing exactly what is going to happen next? Does your government know?
Well, you may have known that China and North Korea has set up a regularized mechanism for exchanges from the top level, to the working level. Especially, the two top leaders promised to brief each other whenever their respective domestic situation there are some big events happens in their respective inside country. So I think the latest visit by Kim Jong-il, one of the major tasks for his visit was to brief Chinese side about the upcoming parties conference, because about 3 months earlier, he visited Beijing and said, we'd like to brief you any big decision whenever we have. So now they have decided to have the parties congress, so they come, they brief to Chinese side about what will happen in their transition, in their situation. Sorry.
In these opening remarks, Shigemura, let me hear your view from Tokyo.
Yeah. I should make some kind of entertainment. So that, Kim Jong-un would not be a successor. It's my opinion. So the Kim Jong-un, he is widely known as a prospective successor. Is a speculated person created by media. And for the last 10 years, there is no one who actually saw Kim Jong-un. There has been no photograph of Kim Jong-un. It's a reality. So within North Korea, there were two political factions. The one faction was composed to support of Kim Jong-un. The leader of the pro-Kim Jong-un was Lee Jae-gang. He was the strong man in Pyongyang, but he was died in June 2010. His death by a traffic accident in Pyongyang around 12:45 a.m. It's midnight. So his death is questionable. There are usually very few cars running on the street in Pyongyang. So around the midnight, so immediately after Lee's death, the subsequent arrests were followed. The members of the Lee Jae-gang's group were investigated, arrested, and purged. The number of purged members were reported around 1,000. They are mainly officials in North Korea. The competing another factor, other factions was led by Chan Son-taek, who is the husband of Kim Jong-il's younger sister. In this political struggle, Chan Son-taek gained power and became deputy chairman of the National Defense Committee. Chan now is the politically influential and powerful person. So Kim Jong-un is known as a successor. However, who is Kim Jong-un? So in this session, I will discuss Kim Jong-un as a successor, but this Kim Jong is not a third son. The Kim Jong-un's name is pronoun or provisional successor. I want to discuss with you.
Professor, thank you. Let's return now to a Korean view. Let me ask Dr. Nam now for your view of whether a crisis is coming and what is likely to happen in the succession, assuming that that is the kind of headline we get this time next week.
First of all, I would like to pinpoint something, that is that the World Economic Forum will be a turning point in discussing with the North Korean topics. We have focused on the denuclearization and opening and reform of the North Korea, not succession, not contingency plan, because the China prohibited discussing such a topic, because China concerned that any open discussions undermine the North Korean leaderships, especially in North Korean armies, and spark something problem in North Korea. But when I offered the participation of world economic reforms in China, topic is the succession and contingency plan. I'm very surprised. China accepts such topic in Tianjin because this is a prohibited topics in China. I don't know why China permitted such hot topics. I hope that China persuade the North Korea make a normal country in East Asia in the futures.
But could I persuade you to give a view on the issue
Okay.
we're discussing? I have to underline that this is hypothetical.
Yeah.
I think there are three kinds of scenario in the futures of North Korea. First is the successful scenario. Even if there are some crisis in short time, North Korean next leader will take powers supported by Jang Song-taek and other military power groups. There are no alternative groups to govern the North Korea in the near future. Second scenario is the disputed scenario. Maybe the initial stage of the sudden death is the very important in dealing with the North Korea. I think if the Kim Jong-un, supported by Jang Song-taek and his military groups, take power in 6 months, situation will go smoothly. But without something normal, North Korea have experienced the controversial debate, then power struggles. Final scenario is the failed scenario. As you know, Kim Jong-un was born in 1982, late 20s. He's very young. He has never experienced the big accomplishment and big job in North Korea. I guess his power graphs depend on his father's death scenario. First is the sudden death scenario. Second is the bad politics. Third scenario is the wheelchair scenario. I think with the sudden death scenario of his fathers, there is no high probability to take a grab of powers. But his father's falling down 2 years ago by stroke, but he recovered smoothly. His father's falling down again, but physically died, but medically not died. He take a time to transfer his power to him. Is the possibility of transfer is high. That's all.
Professor Nam, thank you very much indeed. We do have 2 Chinese contributors here, so there's clearly a degree of comfort about talking on this issue. And the second Chinese contributor is Professor Yan, Director of the Institute of International Studies at Tsinghua. Your view about this critical issue of the succession, if that's going to be the headline, say, this time next week?
Well, from my understanding, the situation is a 50-50, the opportunity. And because we have no evidence to prove, and Kim Jong-un will be a success in the leadership, and also we cannot have any evidence to disprove that. So if that becomes true, from my understanding, that's just the beginning of the transfer of the power from the father to the son, rather than it's the end or the implementation of the power transfer. So if it is only beginning, then there could be all kinds of ending. And what kind of ending mainly depends on 2 factors. And first, how long the father can provide the patron to his son. And so if 5 years, 10 years, and then it will make the transfer relatively stable. But if only 1 month, 2 months, certainly make the transfer is very difficult. And the second factor is that about the Kim Jong-un's personal capability. That means how fast he can develop his personal authority in administrating that country. If he can establish a personal characteristic or the personal, not character, establish a personal authority very quickly, he can also make the transition stable. So this is really very uncertain.
Could that constitute a crisis?
Well, and also that depends, because even let's suppose, and he have to undertake the responsibility for ruling this country by himself, and then we all know that he had to get along with all of this, his father's aid. Now is holding the power. So we don't know how much he can manage the relationship with this senior, experienced Politburos. So there's a personal relationship, and handling the personal relationship will be a key factor.
Right, let's move on to the next stage. Many things can be unpredictable on the Korean peninsula and beyond, into the seas around and into the air above, as well, as Japan knows all too well. Let's now project it 8 weeks from now, roughly, to just before the G20 summit in Korea. Also, just before the business summit, which is the day before the G20 summit, to Wednesday, November the 10th, when North Korea announces, quote, a great new era of leadership, announcing a special broadcast from the DPRK, a great new era of leadership, and other elements of this. The fate of Kim and his clan is unknown, and nothing seemed to be different on the demilitarized zone. Again, all very hypothetical, but this is before a major international event in the South, with a significant number of world leaders attending from many different nations. This could be something which could be thought about in Pyongyang. What about the implications of something like that in this hypothetical when we're talking about the succession? Professor Moon.
Yeah, we can think the unthinkable and we can imagine the unimaginable, but I really don't think there won't be anything, even if North Korea announced it new leadership, because right now things on the Korean Peninsula are changing. Now the United States, China taking leadership in trying to resume the six-party talk processes, and inter-Korean exchange are gradually taking place. And also South Korean leadership is very well aware of security implications of this worsening inter-Korean relationship on G20. Therefore, President Lee Myung-bak has been making some effort to enhance inter-Korean relations in positive manner so that there won't be any kinds of so-called catastrophic development on the Korean Peninsula. More than that, whether Kim Jong-un becomes new leader or not, I really don't think the North Korean leadership will be that irrational and that dumb to provoke any kinds of unimaginable things just before G20, because that could mean the end of North Korean regime and complete isolation and containment of North Korea if North Korea makes that kind of political or military adventure. Therefore, I don't see, even if North Korea announces new leadership, I really don't see any, catastrophic crisis escalation on the Korean Peninsula. G20 will move very smoothly, and everybody will be happy.
I think you used a phrase like inconceivable things. Well, we did see in March what happened with the Chonan. Inconceivable events do take place. So you're saying that there's a rationality in the North, regardless of whether there's a succession issue at that particular time, correct?
Yeah, we can rule out any possibility. Who would have imagined that the terrorists would, really make a suicidal attack on the World Trade Center? Therefore, nothing can be ruled out. But given overall variables and circumstances, I really don't think there will be any kinds of provocation from North Korea before the G20 meeting.
Dr. Yang, the view from Beijing, please.
Well, I'd like to put my answer this way about the Party's Congress, about the subject of great new era of the leadership. Actually, in my observation, the great new era of leadership means a new leadership structure will come out. And the question is, if there was no health problem of Kim Jong-il, whether or not there will be the Party's conference this year, my answer is yes. No matter the Kim Jong-il's health is good or bad, the Party's Congress is certain, because there have been 30 years since the last Party's Congress, and they need a new leadership. They need a new team of the leadership. When we talk about the succession issue from one person to the other, I prefer seeing this issue as a succession from one team to the other. For example, in the 1980s, the Party Congress elected 5-person presidiums. Now, among the 5, only 1 is left. And it's predictable that there will be a new 5 or 7, top leaders. So that's my observation. Say why they say great new era of the leadership. It's a succession period. But through the period, I cannot see any evidence to show some instability or signal of crisis or power struggle and so on. And to the contrary, I think at this moment, they publish the news reflecting their confidence in the succession smooth.
Thank you. Let's get the view from Tokyo. Professor Shigemura.
Yeah, it's, you mentioned that the great new era. What is the meaning of the great new era in Pyongyang? It will not mean the becoming the successor name. The professor mentioned that this is the first time for the last 30 years the party power will be back. The Kim Jong-il debilitated, weakened the party power, stopped the party function last 10 or 20 years. So this is the first time the party power is coming. Why he decided the party coming is still the question. There will be any kind of struggles inside Pyongyang, we think. Also, what kind of leadership in Pyongyang is a collective leadership now, not a dictatorship leadership. It's now the collective leadership with the military leaders and the Chansontek. So the great new era means coming back the party power, but from the party, the powers lost, many powers lost. For instance, the military committee of party was dissolved or moved to the National Defense Committee. So now the party has no power to the military personnel. It's a reality in Pyongyang. So party and military is now divided. So it's a new great era of the starting. So maybe this time the party conference will be some new names or maybe some kind of suppose some new leaders, but they will not decide yet the new leaders this time. The collective leadership will be appear in front of us.
Professor Shigemura, thank you. Let's get another view from Seoul, from Professor Nam.
I think the succession is very important, but not imminent right now, because the North Korea focus on the recovery of the economics and the normalization between Americas, the Seoul, and they have no lose the time to the succession is. Whenever they open the propaganda, 2012 is very important. 2012 will be a period of the prosperous and powerful relations. I think 2 years is a preparatory period in the near future. Let's review his father's succession story. His father, Kim Jong-il, was graduate in 1966. After 10 years of the power struggles in Pyongyang, he finally designated as a successor in 1974. And finally, he designated the 1980s six assemblies as a successor. After that, since 1980s, there are two kinds of sons in Pyongyang. 15 years is a double power period in the past in Pyongyang. His father, Kim Jong-il, had experienced the reign from his fathers. I think the Kim Jong-il do not give his powers to his young son. I think he make a train to his young sons at least 2 years. Therefore, the succession will be formalized and systemized in 2012.
Thank you. Professor Yen, again, this issue about the possibility of some kind of shock just on the eve of, say, the G20 summit in the South. What's your view about whether that is in the policy locker of the North Korean leadership, whoever is the leader?
Well, if they really make an announcement the exact day when the G20 and have all the summit there, and immediately they will discuss about this issue, and that news in some way will overwhelm the G20 summit in South Korea. People will give media will give very less attention to the G20 rather than this change. And second, and if it really happened, they make this announcement. But meanwhile, they know that Kim Jong-il still, they transfer this steer to the son, and the father still sit at behind. I don't think people worry about it. That means the Kim Jong-il still can serve as the backseat driver, and the front driver will legitimize its rule according to the obeying to continuing the old political guidance. Because you continuing the old political guidance means that you can guarantee the country will move in the same direction. The political principle developed by the previous leaders will continue, so it's safe. And it will legitimize the rule rather than undermine it. So immediately, it won't bring any big shock in that country.
I have to go for a second round on this because, okay, we're speculating and we're being hypothetical at the moment. But your language, by and large, all seems pretty reassuring, that it's steady as she goes. The trouble is there are moments when there are acute lack of steadiness on the Korean peninsula. And when you have the Secretary of State, the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, actually at the DMZ talking about a situation which is, quote, highly precarious. You have the strategic survey of the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London publishing this week about North Korea's confrontational diplomacy and brinkmanship as the most effective form of diplomacy. Given the wishes of Pyongyang for reopening the six-party talks, also to get a bilateral deal with the United States, what about, though, a repeat of an event like we saw back in March with the Chung-In on the 26th? In other words, something which draws attention away from something big for the South. Professor.
There is still ongoing debate on the whole this thinking of Korean neighborship, whether it is an act of North Korea or not. Even South Korean public opinion poll shows that only 32% of Koreans would believe in that it is an act of North Korea.
They don't believe your government inquiry.
There is internal debate in South Korea. But apart from that, look, if you're a North Korean decision maker, President Hu Jintao of China will be in Seoul, President Medvedev of Russia will be in Seoul, and then President Obama of the United States will be in Seoul. If those leaders are in Seoul, would North Korea take any kinds of military adventure or provocative behavior? It is just out of common sense. Particularly President Hu Jintao is in Seoul. I really don't think that North Korea would do any actions. Therefore, it is a nice hypothetical setting, but it is quite unthinkable and somewhat out of in the context in a hypothetical setting.
I'm just intrigued by some of your language. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense
there
at
will
all.
be those who say that many things that happen in North Korea don't quite make sense.
Yeah, but still, okay, China is the greatest patron country of North Korea. If the leader of China is in Seoul and then North Korea making any kinds of military provocation against South Korea, it is totally inconceivable.
Totally inconceivable. Dr. Yang.
Yep. In my observation, currently there are two controversial issues. One, Chung-In incident. The other is the very long time nuclear issue. And the situation facing us is whether or not we should allow the debates or disputes on Chung-In incident between the two Koreas block the other bigger issue, say the denuclearization. And the Chinese side hope the debates or disputes between the two Koreas should not impede the process of the six-party talks, because the denuclearization is a greater goal for all of us. So I think we should, I cannot see the solution, commonly accepted solution in short term of the Chung-In incident. But it's imminent and it's important to resume the six-party talks, to resume the momentum of the denuclearization. So let's set aside the disputes on the Chung-In incident and engage in the greater issue, the denuclearization, through the six-party talks. That's Chinese hope, that's Chinese position on the current situation.
Was that point made very clear to Kim Jong-il in Beijing at the end of August?
I think so. Frankly speaking, I don't have any internal information, inside information about the visit, but I can imagine now that they have repeatedly declared they are ready to return to the six-party talks. And also, to my knowledge, whenever Chinese meet North Koreans, we always address the importance of six-party talks, address the importance of the denuclearization. So the nuclear issue was one of the subjects during the summit between Hu Jintao and Kim Jong-il. And the results or the fruits of the summit was the agreement to resumption of six-party talks. I think now North Korea is ready to the six-party talks. That's my impression.
Professor Shigemura, your view?
Yeah. So the South Korea and China, the plan said there will be no such a contingency. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, but North Korea denied. They did not done. But South Korea, you will think North Korea will done. Professor Moon, you will think the North Korea have done.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
I cannot
Yeah,
make an answer to that.
No, inside South Korea, there is a group. It will not be done by North Korea. So from the Western view, the North Korea is a liar because they have done the incident. So the many Westerners are afraid of that second such an incident. But actually, from our viewpoint, it's very impossible now. You mentioned the South Korean Chinese mentioned that is true. But what was happened in North Korea? Its reason is North Korea is facing the big crisis. They have no negotiation with the United States, and no money, no food. So you mentioned that it's one of the brinkmanship of North Korean diplomacy. So at first they want to have a negotiation with the United States, but failed. Secondly, they want to get food from South Korea. It failed. So this time, this incident was totally failed by North Korea. So North Korea now changing their policy. They are promising that they will return to six-party talks. Maybe after G20, they will try to return to six-party talks. But their desire is direct negotiation with the United States, not a negotiation with China, South Korea, Japan. So the six-party talks is not so continuing for a long time. The six-party talks will face a deadlock. So we should prepare. We should take a grand bargaining with North Korea. The United States and Japan promised there's a diplomatic normalization with North Korea. Also, the North Korea should promise they will abandon the nuclear development, and also Japanese the abductees. So we need such a big negotiation, not a salami slice negotiation.
Right. At that point, we've been talking about this for 40 minutes, exactly as we planned to do. I'm proposing that we sort of now pause on the hypothetical and move into a discussion about the current reality. Let me just check among you, how many of all of you listening, experts in this field, many of you, who believe there is a crisis brewing, or a succession crisis brewing in North Korea after what we've heard today? Maybe a handful. Maybe a handful. I assume most of the others feel that actually the reassurance from the platform should be taken as what is likely in the next few weeks and months in North Korea, correct? Does anyone want to dispute that? Right. Let's therefore move ahead with a bit of fact and discussion on where the reality is going at the moment. Professor Nam, let me pick up on what Professor Moon said. This is extraordinary, isn't it, when you have a public document which has actually been published today in South Korea, which is only believed on the Chonan by 32%. of your public, according to the opinion polls. What does that say about the state of government and governance in your country at this critical time when something like that happened with 46 sailors killed?
This Cheonam incident by North Korea was a tragedy in Korea. Young 46 members of Navy died on the spot. The Korean people are angry about North Korean military provocations. Actually, many South Koreans instantly attacked North Korea, but President Lee Myung-bak have many steps to have a time to which attacked our South Korean boat. And we scientifically search for the evidence by North Korea. We request the many countries like the Russia, China, Sweden, and Australian, American. International survey was done, it's finally concluded by North Korea. Actually, we guessed that there are three kinds of proposed by North Korean attack. First is whenever they have a meeting with the America, they argue the peace agreement. As you know, the North Korea and America and South Korea have not ended the war since the 1953. We have just temporarily stopped right now. Therefore, they argued the peace agreement to America. If they continue to argue the peace agreement, West Sea is the controversial area. Second is they want to transfer the local complaint to the outsiders. Final proposal is they forced South Korea to support him by military attacks. Our government have to classify the good behavior and bad behavior by North Korea. Whenever they acted the good behaviors, we support them. But if they try to again attack the South Korean military power, we attack them without notice. Because even if there are some travel or some different opinion across the nation, less than 20%. As you know, the North and South Korea is the same nations. Some people have a sympathy to North Korea because it is the same nations. But we have experienced the war during the 1950s and 53s. I think it is important for Pyongyang acted the good behaviors.
Thank you. I'm going to invite anyone who wants to come in for the last 15, 20 minutes in a moment. But before we do that, Professor Yan, can I just ask you, can you help us understand the relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang at the moment, particularly after this recent visit? Should we understand that Beijing is fully briefed by Pyongyang about intentions? Should we assume that the PRC will have expressed concern about a number of events recently, even though China did not want to go the whole way and condemn North Korea for the Cheonan incident? Can you help us understand the relationship, particularly after this 5-day recent visit?
Well, I think there must be a very thorough communication between China and North Korea about the ancient issue. And the answer must be very, very certain. North Korea definitely tell us, and it has nothing to do with North Korea's military capability. And also, I think these events make the strategists understand that. And this kind of events, that means attacking other countries in East Asia, cannot bring about war. So in some way, it means the danger of the war in this region is declining rather than increasing. And in the old time, you can hardly imagine that. And when one country's warship attacked by the other countries, especially alleged by one government that being attacked by the neighbors, and then they won't go to war. That's very rare. So that means this region becomes very peaceful. And then even you can attack other warship and without worry about the war. And so I think this situation indicates that that's why in this region we can have a really long peace from 1991, when at the end of the war in the Cambodia. And East Asia already becomes a region which has a longer peace than most of the rest of part of the world. And maybe the region will have a longer peace than the East Asia is North America and Pacific Australia.
But should we assume, even though one sees nothing of this in public, that the view in Beijing towards Pyongyang tends to be pretty instructive? In other words, making it very clear what Beijing is prepared to accept and not accept, and admonishing if necessary.
Okay, at this moment, we think the Russian investigation didn't make any news, release any report to the public about these events, and Sweden didn't sign the investigation report. So from my understanding, in China, most of the readers of a newspaper do not believe, and South Korea have the capability to attack.
But more generally, the relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang at the moment.
At that moment, I think the relationship is quite stable.
What does that mean? 50-50, or does Beijing have the upper hand?
Well, I think we respect North Korea as a sovereign state, so we consider the relationship is equal. We cannot indicate the North Korea to do anything. And they are member of the UN, and we cannot dictate that country to do anything. We can only communicate with each other and get to the common understanding through the dialogue.
Dr. Yang, do you want to add anything about the relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang?
Yes. China and North Korea has set up a really equal footing relationship, no matter, although this is a relationship between a big country and a small country. It's quite an equal footing. And secondly, on the Qinghai incident, China's position, you can feel, is trying to avoid to say yes or no on the controversial issue. I mean, the South Korea say yes, North Korea say no, and China doesn't command any first-hand evidences on the incident. So, firstly, China expressed condolences to South Korea through different channels with different formats. And secondly, China condemned the incident because this is a really, really dangerous and a bad action. And thirdly, because we have no any first-hand evidences, so we try to avoid say neither yes nor no. That's my summary of the China position on the Tianjin incident.
And the broader relationship?
And the broader relationship, and I think basically the political ties is always stable, and the economic ties in recent years, as I mentioned earlier, North Korea has begun to shift their focus from the military to their economy, and naturally the economic ties between the two sides are increasing. That's the general observation of the.
All right. Well, I hope we've shed light on the kind of dynamics on the Korean Peninsula and further north. I have 2 or 3 people I know who want to ask questions or make points. Yes. Wait a minute. Let's get the microphone working.
Hello.
Yep.
During the
Can you
financial,
introduce yourself?
So my name is Mark Troll with a firm called Orcasite. So it's a spread. During the financial crisis, we learned the term black swan as being a very unusual event that sort of had dramatic change. With North Korea, one can imagine 2 black swan events, and I'd be interested in seeing what you think. So the first sort of obvious black swan event would be a bad black swan, which is a coup, a military coup. It's a dynasty, it's a small family. It would not be difficult to imagine a coup. The second black swan event is a positive event, and there one looks to Libya, when Colonel Gaddafi basically decided to not be a terrorist and open up Libya. So right now I'd be very interested in your ideas of this black swan, of either a negative one of a coup or a positive event where the family just decides to be nice to people.
Right. Pick whichever option you find appropriate. Professor Moon.
Coup is quite inconceivable, North Korea don't want military first politics. Military united. Therefore, it's quite inconceivable. Therefore, it is extremely monolithic, and the military is a beneficiary of major stakeholders in North Korean society. Therefore, it is quite inconceivable for the military to stage coup. Okay, and another one, yes, if the United States come up with a proposal which North Korea cannot reject, such as a diplomatic normalization, yeah, and I think North Korea will, Kim Jong-il might become like a Deng Xiaoping. Very simple, because if you analyze North Korean behavior is really tied up to the external security environment. If its external security environment improves, then there is no reason for military politics. There is no reason for military occupies a strategic position. Therefore, it's very simple.
Are you saying that they might think actively about the Gaddafi option, given what happened when that boat loaded with WMD parts was picked up in the Mediterranean? And that led to an extraordinary unraveling.
Nobody to go back to the Libyan case, but the Libyan case, Tony Blair played the intermediary role, assuring regime security to Gaddafi, with the assumption that he can get $3 billion in a compensation for those victims of Pan Am. If the United States has adopted that kind of approach to North Korea through the informal, secret, clandestine approach with some kinds of assurance to North Korean leadership, why North Korea wouldn't accept it? But the whole this Libyan model was not applied to North Korea as it was originally applied.
Right. Who else would like to come in on that?
Well, I think the coup d'etat can be categorized in two groups. One is the military coup d'etat, the other is the political coup d'etat. And I totally agree with Mr. Moon. As long as the Kim Jong-il is alive, and I don't think there's it's likely to have any kind of a coup d'etat. But after him, that's possible. And but generally speaking, the the political coup d'etat is more likely than the military coup d'etat.
Professor Shigemura.
Yes, the North Korea and Libya is totally different. United States did not attack directly to Kim Jong-il. Yeah, first point. Secondly, that North Korea has no natural resources. Thirdly, what is the goal of North Korean leaders is to maintain their regime, not to the prospect for their nation people. So it's a totally different.
Okay. Over there, please, and then here.
Hello. Hello. Hi, I'm Tony Miller from Pacific Alliance.
Could you speak? Sorry, we're having difficulty hearing you. Say again, please.
How do you do? I'm Tony Miller from Pacific Alliance. Gentlemen, thank you very much. You've been incredibly eloquent examining a hypothetical short-term possibility. May I ask you to examine a more long-term hypothetical possibility? Tell me what you think are the possibilities of reunification on the Korean Peninsula in our lifetimes. I'm 53, my father is 90. So let's say in the next 40 years.
Dr. Yang.
In my view, if we really want a lasting peace and stability, the unification of the Korean Peninsula should be brought about. It's necessary, it's the must, if we really want the lasting peace and stability. And secondly, in the long run, the process of the unification cannot be a one-time action. It will go through a gradual way. For example, let's imagine confederation or federation, no matter what else. It's a gradual way, in short. And thirdly, and I think in the whole process of unification, the two Koreas should be the major parties. All decisions relating to the unification should be mutually accepted and commonly decided by the two Koreas. As long as we, all the outsiders, all external powers support this principle, I think the independent self-decision unification will certainly come in peaceful manner.
Unifying of two sovereign states, that's possible in your view?
Well, as I said, it's a gradual way through many stages with different formats. You may see sometime later a confederation, also with different sovereign states. But finally, you may imagine the two sovereign states can combine with one.
Professor Moon.
Yeah, in fact, it all depends on the concept or definition of unification. If it, as Professor Yang pointed out, it's a simple commonwealth or union of states like European Union, unification can come easily. But if we assume unification in terms of one single unified nation state, it takes several decades. Therefore, if we set our goal of unification low, such as in terms of a Commonwealth or European Union type of union of inter-Korean state, yeah, it's more than doable within decade.
For the more comprehensive unification, what are the circumstances that need to exist for that to happen?
Can you repeat it again?
What are the circumstances which would have to exist for that to happen?
No, let me tell you one thing. It is highly inconceivable for North Korea to give up its sovereignty. Okay? North Korea will never follow the German model. Therefore, all this concept of unification by absorption is virtually impossible.
Okay. Right, Dr. Nam.
As President Lee Myung-bak told, the reunification tax is required. He said last month that the reunification tax. Therefore, many Koreans think about the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Whenever we have a seminar with the Germans, we ask, please give me a tip, his experience, because Germany is the unique countries reunified. Germany counterparts told that please continue to whisper reunification would not harm to the four superpower, Russia, China, Japan, and America. Germany tips point is that the international point is very important factors to South Korea accomplish the reunification of Korean Peninsula in the near futures. I think the one generation will be required to accomplish the Korean Peninsula in legally, but the de facto reunification will be enough in 15 or 20 years in the near future.
I got to tell you, as someone who was in East Berlin the night the wall came down, in many ways it was an accident. It was going to happen eventually, but it was an accident what happened that night. Because I was there, I was watching the bit of paper being handed over by Gunter Schabowski, and it's hard to see how that'll happen in North Korea. Please.
Well, I totally agree with our anchor. I think peaceful reunification is always accidental, unexpected, and it's something beyond human beings' plan or human beings' strategy. And I don't think you can have any man-made strategy can achieve the peaceful reunification. So that based on what? Mainly based on the collapse of the regime of one side. So from my understanding, if you want to see the peaceful unification on the earth in the future for all kinds of countries, and yearly it's beyond your expectation rather than it's what you can expect.
Professor Shigemura.
Yeah, that's the official opinion of Korea and China. So actually, what is that big obstacle is one is that U.S. Army in South Korea. After the unification, if the U.S. Army still remain in Korean Peninsula, China will not agree. China will ask without U.S. military. So for a long time, the Korea will reunified. It's true, but short time condition is very difficult.
The U.S. will withdraw its army from South Korea because of physical crisis before unification.
Let's just get one more question, and then we're running out of time, but please.
I'm Takotsuka, former Japanese member of the Diet. And Mr. Shigemura-san pointed out that the DPRK is under now the collective leadership, right? Collective leadership. So I'd like to ask Shigemura-san and other panelists as well. Who do you think decide the withdrawal from the six-party talks and Chung-In incident, and why did they change their mind to get back to the six-party talk?
Who decided in the North to withdraw from the six-party talks in the Chung-In incident? Professor Moon, quickly.
Six-party talk, Kim Jong-il and Kang Seok-ju.
And Chung-In?
I don't know.
Dr. Yang.
Well, I have no any idea about what happened behind the Tianjin incident because I even have no clear idea who did it. And as to the six-party talks, yes, I think it was Kim Jong-il who said, no six-party talks, never, that. And then he said, yes, we are ready to return. All the decisions from this end to the other end decided by Kim Jong-il.
And is that part of the succession process?
Well, as I said, actually, the succession process is a succession of team rather than individual person.
Okay. Dr. Nam.
I think China wanted to transfer the issue. Cheongnam issue is not good for the China national interests. China continued to support the North Korean arguments. It is time for China wanted to transfer the issue from Cheongnam to the six-party talkers. And Hu Jintao had a meeting with Kim Jong-il, induced the six-party talkers, come back to the six-party talkers and support the succession and trade the issue. I think our government also agreed the six-party talk reopening in Beijing. But North Korea admitted his crime and do not again in the future. Please. And inevitably, the six-party talk will happen before winter season.
Dr. Yan, final word.
Okay, from my understanding, actually, the North Korea agree with the resumption of six-party talk, mainly because the South Korea set a precondition for resumption of six-party talk. That means that they require the North Korea to apologize for the incident. So I think the North Korea policymaker is very clever. They find this a good opportunity, shift off the burden from their shoulder, so that, okay, we agree to resume six-party talk. You check with the North Korea whether they agree or not. And North Korea said they insist on the apologize. So the North Korea said it had nothing to do with the six-party talk with the instance. So nowadays, make the North Korea become the obstacle to the resumption of six-party talk. And concerning this instance, from my understanding, North Korea withdraw from six-party talk much earlier than this incident. The purpose is to have a second nuclear test. Unfortunately, the six-party talk participants didn't want to use six-party talk prevent North Korea to go on for the second nuclear test. That's why the six-party talk failed.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much indeed. We started off with the question about what if there's a succession crisis in North Korea? I think the view from inside this room, at least, is that there's going to be no crisis. And the most commonly used word I've heard in the last hour is inconceivable and impossible, which means, I suppose, that everything is measurable and probably predictable, which sounds a little odd on the Korean peninsula from the way we've seen developments in the last few months and years. But can I thank you very much indeed for entering the spirit of this hypothetical, and you as well. Thank you.